Hello and welcome to Worlds Apart. We may live in a global village, but every corner of this village is guided by different rules on what one may or may not say in public. One man's truth teller has long become another man's bigot, while public debate often comes down to venting outrage or hurling insults rather than discussing policies. Is it still possible to have a substantive conversation with those who disagree with you vehemently? Well, to discuss that, I'm now joined by Hopkins, British journalist and media personality. Katie, it's good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for seeing me.
Now, you're a pretty controversial person in your own country. Many people consider you purposefully offensive, and yet over the past few days that you've been here in Russia, in St. Petersburg, you've only said nice things about this country, which honestly is not very used to hearing nice things about itself. Are you being purposefully spiteful? Are you saying all those things as a contrarian?
People have been surprised by my reporting from St. Petersburg because I love this place. I love the openness of it, and it's been a real surprise to me. We are, I think, in the West, in my personal view, you know, Putin is painted as a monster, and this is very much the monster's lair. And people are almost fearful, actually, of coming to Russia because there's this idea that it's somehow a frightening place. And all I've been trying to present to people and show people, I think, is that it's only ever what I see or my truths. And my truths from this place is that I love it. I feel very safe here, much safer than in London, for example. And I also find people here to be really Russian first. So they identify as Russian to me, and that's a real difference from the country that I come from.
Let me pick up on that point, because you had one tweet specifically about St. Petersburg that seemed to rile a lot of people. You described the city as a place untouched by the myth of multiculturalism and deranged diversity. And I'm sure you've seen all those dozens of replies of people pointing out to you that this is the most multicultural city in the whole of Russia.
I hear all that, and of course the 160 nationalities and built by Italians and the French and the buildings and the Dutch name and whatever.
And we also have a very vibrant Muslim community who petitioned the Tsar for the first mosque.
5,000 people. Yeah, no, I've heard it all. I've seen it. I get what people are saying. I get them. But when you come to St. Petersburg as an outsider, and I'm an outsider, it feels Russian. People, if you speak to people in the street, or with help when I speak to people in the street, they identify as Russian first. You go to the UK, you won't find any of that.
Russian may mean an ethnic affiliation, or it may mean a national affiliation. So most of the different nationalities whom we love to have in this city would also identify as Russian. I wonder if you, given that you like it so much, maybe multiculturalism is not such a bad thing after all.
No, because I don't buy your definition of multiculturalism at all. And just because you have one mosque with 5,000 people able to fit into it, that does not in any way replicate the Europe that I know. I've just come from Belgium, Molenbeek, in fact, the jihadi capital of Europe, where they have 22 mosques in a 6-kilometre square. Do you have miles or kilometres here?
Kilometres.
Yeah, 6-kilometre squared area, 22 mosques. So it's very different for me where I live in terms of our multiculturalism, which is much more about monocultures who live in ghettos and don't rub shoulders. It's a very different definition to the one that you might understand.
I actually want to discuss that, but before we do that, many of the tweets that you have posted have these hashtag Putin rocks, which I find very ironic, because here in Russia, you wouldn't be allowed by law to say or publish many things that you say about the Muslims in particular, because in this society we do prioritize social cohesion over freedom of speech, and that has been like that over many years, I would even argue centuries, and I think it only intensified under Putin. Do you still think he rocks?
Yeah, I think Putin rocks in many ways.
But he stands contrary to most of your ideas. I mean, he would be absolutely appalled by many of the things you say.
That's fine as well. I think you started out by saying, you know, do we live in a society where we can disagree but still sit in the same room? I don't mind if Putin thinks many of my ideas are morally abhorrent. That's absolutely his right to have his views. I hold my views very clearly and very dearly. For me, I come from a country where there is an Islamic takeover going on. I come from a country where my daughters, our daughters, are targeted by Islamic jihadists. And that's not, I'm not afraid to say any of the things I say.
Why would
it's very
Putin rock
important.
then? I mean, I understand your
So why
baggage,
does Putin rock to me? Because for too long, the West has painted him as a monster, and I don't think it's acceptable any longer. Should he be back in the G8? Absolutely. Does he need to have sanctions against him? No, I don't. I don't have a problem with Putin in the way that other people seem to, or maybe you have.
Well, I don't know if you follow Putin's statements, but just last week he spoke again about the need to relax immigration rules in Russia, and he specifically pointed out that, people of all religious and ethnic backgrounds should be welcomed, especially if they have some connection to Russia or the so-called Russian world. So he seems to be far more bullish on immigration, particularly Muslim immigration, than Theresa May's government.
I don't know if you could be. I don't know if you could bend down on. If you could sort of cow in submission to a religion more than we have. We have de facto Sharia law in the UK right now. We prevented a journalist from coming into our country on the basis of future hate speech, as yet unsaid. That is a bizarre situation to live in. So I think we have it much worse.
This country also has its very peculiar understanding of the freedom of speech. But, bringing you back to the Muslim immigration or any immigration for that matter, I think the difference is how our societies are handling it. And in this country, it would not be considered advisable to put people in high density neighborhoods. They would be
agreed.
Not only required to integrate, but the state would actually facilitate that integration.
And on that, you and I completely agree. I've seen multiple examples in the no-go zones that I visited across Europe where migrants are all packed away into the suburbs. It never works. It creates a situation where there's them and us. If you go to Sweden, if you go to Belgium, if you go to parts of London, there's parts of London, Sweden, Belgium, you can't walk anymore if you're a Western woman and you have your hair uncovered. You'll be spat at and called white trash. That's never going to work. And if you have a system here where you are able to integrate, of course that's going to work much better. But we don't have multiculturalism. It's what I was explaining to you. We have a system of monocultures living in ghettos. That's a very different thing.
Now, much of Russia's immigration comes from the so-called stans. Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and you're famous or infamous for referring to London as Londonistan, which you have to agree carries some pejorative connotation.
Oh, it is pejorative, absolutely.
What's
why
wrong
I use
with
it.
stans?
The reason I call London Londonistan is because to me it's completely fallen to the control of the Muslim mayor there, Sadiq Khan. He is spectacularly useless at his job. Under Sadiq Khan, there are some statistics that I'm sure neither you nor I could argue about, in the sense that our murder rate is now higher than New York, in the sense that our stab rate has just gone up by 25%, in the number of acid attacks that are happening, 60 moped attacks a day with hammers and machetes. That's life in Londonistan under the Muslim mayor. And what I see from that is a lack of control, a lack of law and order, and a political Islam where religion and politics are integrated and people vote according to their faith. And that is not democracy.
But, from what you describe, you seem to have the beef with the uncontrolled immigration and integration policies, and yet the way you express it is pejorative in a much broader sense, because stans mean countries, not cities. Why?
Because London is a country of its own, and that's precisely why I use the word. It is pejorative, yes.
By making that statement, you are mocking other countries rather than the UK authorities, who are arguably responsible.
I'm not mocking the UK authorities. I'm mocking the Muslim mayor of London and the country that he's built there, where 95% of some areas, so if I think about Tower Hamlets, Newham, 90% Muslim population, that does not reflect multiculturalism. That is not a multicultural country or a city. And when he speaks only for London, and yet he appears to speak for the UK, and for someone like myself who comes from a place called the rest of the UK, it's intensely frustrating.
But Katie, I think you do understand that when you refer to Londonistan, people may draw conclusions about yourself without hearing your argument first, because I think that this point that you've been making about imported monocultures that exist in isolation, this is a very valid and under-discussed point in my view. It's a real sociological issue that has to be studied, and yet that issue seems to be brushed under the table because people take offense at you. Don't you think that the style of your presentation undermines the very valid argument that you're making?
Not for my money, because, you know, there is apart from the kind of social study of monocultures that I think is so imperative, and that's why I've done the work I've done in Sweden, in Sicily, in all of the no-go zones that I visit. I do actually want Sadiq Khan to be out. I want him out of office. I want to champion getting that man out of office.
And will you achieve that by referring to London as Londonistan?
I think we spend far too much time tiptoeing around issues these days. I think it's one of the reasons I think your line of questioning is good, because you come straight to the point. And it's very much the style that I use with my commentary, especially if you use the format like Twitter. You haven't got 45 minutes to chat around the subject. You've got a few words to make your
Katie,
point.
with all due respect, I would never compare anyone to cockroaches. I think you can find a more expressive metaphor. I mean, I know this whole controversy about your
I think
column.
it was very fair. I think you're undermining the column, which still stands today. So 2014, no, if you bring it up, I'm going to talk about it. 2014, I wrote a column that compared migrants across the Med to we need to give it reference. Cockroaches. I said they're like cockroaches because they have an enduring nature. They seem to be able to survive no matter what. And we were taught in schools the only creature that can survive a nuclear holocaust is cockroaches. That still applies today.
That still applies today,
Boats
but everybody is arguing about
right
your
now.
choice of words rather than the issue you were trying to raise.
Have we stopped the boats? No. Did 932
because
migrants just
everybody
arrive
is
on a boat?
arguing whether
Yes.
using cockroach was a nice way
Tell me, while you're arguing about cockroaches, tell me,
there are many resilient species. Come on. Well, you could have compared them to whales
That's
or
not my question.
seagulls and so
whales. That would be a bizarre way of writing copy and very poor English. But let me ask you a question. The Aquarius, with, I think it's 632, it could be 932, I apologise for not knowing. Let's say 632 migrants on board. It has nowhere to dock. Italy just said, no, we won't have you. Tell me, what would you do about that?
If you broke it, you own it. It was in part Western and primarily UK policy that created the mess in Libya. And if you created that mess in those neighborhoods, you should expect certain repercussions for yourself.
So what? So what port should take them? Which port?
Well,
Italy won't.
Well,
Malta said no.
You guys have to chip in as well.
But that's no solution. So my solution...
Why is it not a solution to send your troops to a foreign country or to send your special forces there to unravel the life there and then refuse to accept them?
We shouldn't be running ferry boats across the Med. That's no way
You're a common
reasonable.
sense lady, and what you're trying to tell me is that causes don't have consequences. You're simply trying to wish them away, and I don't think that's a common sense solution. Seriously.
I think you're overlooking this idea that people say they're running from something, they're fleeing something. In my opinion, and it seems surprising to me, I would think as a mum it seems surprising to you, why is it these young men of fighting age are running away? But if it's that terrifying there, why do they leave their women and children? I've been on the coast of southern Italy trying to get those NGO
I've been to Libya,
boats.
and I can tell you that...
Why do they leave their women and children behind? If it's so terrifying, tell me that.
Look,
answer my question.
Well, because first of all, many of them are not married. Most of the people who migrate into Europe are...
So just the young men come?
Yes.
Because it's so scary in Libya, they leave the women behind. Really?
Yes.
All they manage to bring is their mobile phone. Really?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes, because...
we completely disagree.
Well, we certainly disagree on that, but don't you think that, I mean, I understand your point on immigration, but don't you think that by arguing this line of argument, you're also absolving your own government of its responsibilities, because it did contribute to the mess, and you recognize that in your argument on Syria, for example. You do not support the UK government policies on Syria.
The solution is not to bring people on ferry boats run by charities over the Med. The solution is in-country solution. Just as in Syria and other migrant camps, we've suggested facilitating in-country solutions, because of course
you don't want to send them money for that. The UK is very stingy about allocating money for
We did actually give additional monies after the incident.
Well, it's not enough to rebuild the country.
The answer is certainly not to bring those people to our countries. And I think the boat like the Aquarius and NGOs that are running the ferry service, I think it's utterly irresponsible, and all that it does is encourages more people to come and potentially lose their lives on the Med. And that seems to me the opposite of what you would want to happen.
Well, Katie, let's take a very short break now, but we will be back in just a few seconds. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Worlds Apart with Katie Hopkins, British journalist and media personality. Katie, just before the break, we were talking about multiculturalism, and I want to repeat the point that you made earlier, that you believe that the UK hasn't been able to achieve it. What you have is, ghettos of individual cultures.
Absolutely.
Rather than, true diversity, the mixing of various cultures. And yet you also wrote in your book, and you made that point over and over again in many of your interviews, that you wouldn't let your kids play with anyone who isn't called Margaret, Nigel, Donald, let alone Mohammed. Isn't that the very attitude that fosters cultural ghettos in the first place?
Well, this was less of a cultural thing in the sense of different ethnic backgrounds. This was my experience from going to a state school in the UK. And you could tell, I had this kind of idea as a mum doing the school run, you could tell what a kid would be like by its name. And I still stand by that. So there's certain names that I hear, and it'll be Tyler, it'll be Destiny, all of these kind of names.
But
and
you also
know
mentioned
what sort of
the name Mohammed.
Well, Mohammed, if you think about it in the UK, and it's shocking to me, the number one name in the UK is Mohammed. The number two name in the UK is Mohammed. And I find that from a demographic perspective, it's very frightening that actually by 2050 there'll be more Muslim births in the UK than there will be British births. And I find that actually quite distressing.
I have a kid who is born to a Muslim father.
Sure.
He's 4 years old.
Is he called Mohammed?
His name is different, but
it's not Mohammed.
It is a Muslim name.
But is it Mohammed?
It is not Mohammed, but it is a Muslim name.
Well
and
done.
I wonder, well, I mean, I would have called him Mohammed if...
but then everyone's called Mohammed, so how do you know who's your Mohammed?
I think in Russia I would have a lesser problem finding a Mohammed at a playground.
Let me ask you a question if you have a Muslim husband.
But first, let me ask you a question. Would you ban your kid from playing with my kid? Because he has a... Muslim-sounding name.
No, as long as he had... I mean, it wasn't really done on names other than I could tell what a kid would be like with their names, but it was about the fact that they would turn up to school without their homework, they'd turn up without the right uniform, they don't have the manners that I prefer for my children, and I am
and
quite...
do you think Muslim families are not as diligent?
It was never about Muslim families. It was about the types of families that I met in the school playground and the types of mums that I wasn't particularly keen on. Whatever we say, we all know the mums that we like and the mums that we don't like. I was just really honest about it.
But regardless of whether you were referring to like a British kid or a Muslim kid, isn't that a fundamentally anti-Christian thing to say? Because, you talk a lot about
I've done many anti-Christian things in my life. I am not a good ambassador for the Christian religion, and I see that.
And yet you talk a lot about Christian values as underpinning the...
I'm just criticising myself.
Society.
Because, like, if you see any of the stuff that I've done, I mean, I think many Christians would want to distance themselves from me entirely. But what I noticed about people with their strong beliefs, particularly here in St. Petersburg, it's a joy to be surrounded by so many Christian churches, by the Orthodox, people that believe so strongly. 90% of people here believe in the Christian faith. That's key. Second thing, I haven't finished. The second thing I really think about the Christian faith, having watched people in South Africa who are being persecuted, is there's a real belief in God and the land, and people need something to believe in, and I really respect that, even though I'm a bad ambassador for Christianity.
Katie, let me correct you a little bit, because...
You're going to try and correct stats.
This is one of the most atheist cities in Russia.
We can argue about stats all you want. Well, it's a very Christian-feeling city.
Well,
let me ask you the question I wanted to ask you.
Feeling is in the eye of the beholder, but if you actually pull people
Let me ask you a question. So you have a Muslim husband, right?
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question via you for him.
No problem.
If Islam is so fantastic, why do Muslims always flee to Christian countries?
I tell you why, because Christian countries, or Western countries to be more precise, tend to send troops to their countries, destroy their homes, and then push them out of their neighborhoods. That's why. Because
why come to Christian countries? Why not go to Saudi or another Muslim country?
Well, because Saudi Arabia actively prevents their Muslim neighbors from going there, and the UK government or the US.
But why does Saudi prevent migrants going there?
Look, I'm not an ambassador for the Saudi government.
No, but I'm asking,
because
why come to Christian lands?
It is a repressive government.
Isn't it because Christian lands are free and tolerant and open? And isn't that the very thing that Muslims try and change when they arrive in our country? That's my question and my challenge in the UK.
When you say that Christian lands are tolerant, or when you actually...
Open, tolerant, welcoming, enabling people to practice religion, but then they try and take over.
And yet you actively and publicly advocate for the rejection, for the shunning of children, for the ostracizing of children based on their names?
Yes.
And you call that tolerant and open?
No, I'm not saying, I said a million times, I'm not a great ambassador for being Christian, but I'm asking you, why do Muslims always seem to come to Christian countries and then want to take over?
Well, I thought I actually tried to answer, because many Western countries wage wars on Muslim
why go
countries.
there then? Why not go to Saudi? Why not go to another country where
because when you
the
have
Muslim
a kid,
faith is practiced?
Kate,
Tell me.
when you have a kid on your hands, you try to find any refuge. Literally, you would go across the Mediterranean even if you don't know how to swim. You would do anything possible for your 2-year-old
But we
or
don't
3-year-old.
see any women and children on the boats across the Med.
We do see, but even though I would agree that primarily it is
620 something on the Aquarius, 11 children. We don't see many women and children, I promise you.
Well,
they're left behind.
I've reported extensively from the ground, both in Libya and in Syria. So believe me, I think you could afford me some credibility. And there are women and children in desperate conditions, but it is more difficult for them to move around, that's for sure. Now, I followed you long enough to conclude that there are some issues that are very close to your heart that I think you believe in passionately. And yet there are those things that you seem to be throw out there for controversy, to simply propel your argument. Can you yourself tell one from the other?
I think it's trite to imagine that I say things just to be controversial. You would not withstand the level of attacks, of police harassment, of detention, of having my passport taken, of social services being called on my children, of my family being under threat, of having 2 jihadis plot to behead me in November 2017. I don't believe you would withstand those levels of people trying to silence you if you didn't believe what you said. And that may convince you or not. I'm not seeking to. I'm only trying to give people an understanding of what it's like to try and speak freely and openly with my views, which are known for being very strong. So you would have to really question yourself, why would I do this if I didn't really believe what I say? And I believe my country can be better. I believe in Donald Trump, and I believe Japan, Russia and America are going to be the 3 leaders that fight back against the globalists. So that's my kind of part of my enthusiasm for Putin here as well.
You mentioned the silencing of dissenting views, and I totally hear you. I personally have been looked into by Ofcom a couple of times, but
they're paper shufflers.
I would at least agree with you that there is a political censorship, pro-liberal political censorship going on in a number of Western countries. But when I hear certain views, again, postulating that children could be mistreated because of their names,
that is not a fair summary of what I've said at all. At all. No, that is not a fair summary of what I've said. I said I wouldn't invite certain children to my house if they had a certain name. That is not mistreatment.
I don't know if you know how feeling rejected, feeling rejected is pretty painful for a child. I can tell you from my own experience. I'm pretty sure you had that experience yourself in your life. So when you say that certain children are not to be engaged, certain families are to be looked down to, and
you're labouring that point, to be fair.
What do you mean?
There's plenty of other arguments we could have apart from a children's name debate I had about 12 years ago.
Anyway, when you raise an issue like that, some people may indeed support the argument for a certain degree of censorship. Don't you think that by laying out something as controversial as we've just discussed, you actually provide a motive, a justification for curtailing the genuine political debate?
I think you're labouring a really facile point. I think the reason I have so much support, the reason I have close to 1 million followers on Twitter, the reason the articles I put up are most read and most viewed is because people identify with the things I'm saying. Because what we no longer have in this society are people that will tell the truth to power. And I'm not at all frightened of that. I'm not at all frightened of saying we need my country back. We should not be bowing down to people who choose to join us. Those things really matter.
There is a difference between criticizing your government on irresponsible migration policies.
And I criticise other parents.
And talking about children.
No, I criticise parents.
There's a difference between discussing children's
Some
names.
Parents don't deserve to be parents. They aren't good enough parents. That's also perfectly true. You're just taking offence on behalf of other people. Many people agree with me and disagree with you. That's also okay. It's we can be relaxed about that.
Yeah, but I don't understand why do you have to, because you are very passionate. Why do you have to mix those, very substantive points?
I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a pretty poor Christian, I'm a traveller, I'm an anti-immigrant kind of personality. I believe in politics. I'm many things. I'm not just a kind of person that sits in front of a camera. A big part of who I am is a mum, and there's certain mums who don't really deserve to be mums because they don't bring their children up properly.
Since our time is running out, I do want to ask you one more question about censorship. I know that you are very concerned about the Tommy Robinson case, a very swift sentencing and jailing of a person for the reporting on a politically sensitive case in defiance of a court order. And
majority Pakistani Muslim.
From what I know, the British system has a long tradition of legal precedent. Do you fear that you yourself, with the views that you hold, may find yourself in a similar legal situation?
I imagine I probably am top of the list now for being imprisoned for my views. And what concerns me about Tommy Robinson, people will say, well, he was contempt of court, he shouldn't have been reporting now. I understand all that. I think the two key questions are, where was the swift justice for the majority Pakistani Muslim paedophile gangs when Tommy Robinson was sentenced in 5 hours to 13 months? And secondly, I see it very much, you have the Skripal case here, or there was Putin was alleged to have poisoned individuals on UK soil. I don't see any difference between the Skripal case with Putin and what our government has done to Tommy Robinson. They've put him in prison. He will not survive in prison. One guard let the Muslim gangs into his cell, he's done. So I think the British government is no better than Putin in any regard, because it silences political people that it doesn't like to hear, just in the same way that it's alleged that Putin did. And so we are no better than Russia.
If you're concerned that you may be next, is that going to change the way you...
No, not at all. Not at all. If I'm imprisoned for my views, then it seems to me it's not the truth teller that will be in the wrong. It will be the authority. And I would hope that there will be a new legion of other outspoken individuals like myself that will come and fill my shoes, and I will write a new book, I guess, Rude Behind Bars.
Well, Katie, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for your time. And
thank you.
I encourage our viewers to keep this conversation going in our social media pages. As for me, hope to see you again, same place, same time, here on Worlds Apart.